Beyond occupies a unique space in the Batman mythos for a couple of reasons. One being, it's one of the rare instances when a character born out of an adaptation ends up leading backwards into the comic medium with some degree of success. But secondly, and some may say more astonishingly, Batman Beyond represents a successful passing down of the mantle and the torch. Also, it is for the most part well received, which is saying something when the mantle you're taking up is from one of the most iconic characters out there, Batman, or the Batman. And on top of all that, the original character was still alive when this happened. Terry Mcginnis is a unicorn, a cyberpunkish unicorn. Time of recording, DC Comics is set to try its hand at another Batman Beyond comic series, Batman Beyond Neo Year. Another different approach bringing Terry into the comic universe, utilizing a more classic passing of the torch moment, the death of Bruce Wayne. This is an attempt to fuse the DC animated universe and the DC comic verse. Again, it's happened before, but this time it's happening within the context of the Omniverse, a space where all things are canon and technically matter, except that some really don't. The Omniverse did have some potential, but also some rather obvious potential stumbling blocks, and unfortunately in lots of places it tripped right over them. It is a bit of a struggle to make people care about something specific when everything matters, which to some comes off as, well, then nothing does. But before we dive into yet another attempt to make comic book Terry stick, let's take a look at what made him stand out in the first place. What was it that made the concept of Terry as Batman work? Batman Beyond isn't perfect, but it does a lot of things right in the legacy department. Things that could work well in future attempts are/will be made with other characters. It's gonna be a long one, so get a snack. Hi, it's me from the future. This video is brought to you by Boxu. They are a snack box subscription service, so that you can enjoy authentic Japanese snacks all year round, a box a month, and they are from Japan. This box is great if you're a person who loves to try various snacks, but also if you're interested in learning about them. This is the Valentine's box, so it's romantic. Look, these are shaped like hearts and they're spicy. This box had lots of doubles for sharing, because sharing is caring. You love the person you're sharing this box with, even if it's yourself. The box comes with cultural guides and info on the snacks. The website even has documentaries you can watch by the artisans, because they also list the makers in here, and some of these people have been making snacks and desserts for a long time. In some cases, we're talking over a century. In general, each month, each box has a different theme. Now, you can preview what you're gonna get inside the box, but I like to be surprised. And if you're ready to start your Japanese snack journey, I have a code for you. Use my code CASUALLY10 and use the link down below to get 10% off your own authentic Japanese snack box subscription from Boxu. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and let's take a look at how Batman Beyond handles legacy. Legacy characters are difficult to pull off in general, particularly in a comic space which operates in many ways under soap opera logic. This in regards to it being a forever story, a never-ending story. Certain characters come to occupy mythic spaces inside of these universes, so the idea that one could take these characters and replace them is always going to be something that will take some skill in navigating. No matter who the character is taking up the torch, even if it's someone who seems like the most obvious choice. That is just by virtue of the way narratives are set up, particularly in the comic universe. When well handled, these handoffs can be extremely satisfying, and they can give the universe a feeling of weight, as though things are progressing, which can be rewarding for those who have invested a lot of time into it, while others will prefer a different status quo. It is inevitable as fans are coming in and out at different points. And again, those original characters will occupy that benchmark status. There are discussions to be had as to whether certain characters should be replaced or not, if the goal is to keep these universes going forever. Or isn't it? Should things creep forward at a slow incremental pace? Or should some things remain the same? And if that is the case, should there be a cutoff as to how many new characters are introduced within a particular mythos? Or should some big changes occur? There are arguments to be made for all these permutations, and pros and cons to all. Trying to do them all at once is what leads to things like the Omniverse. For one thing that helps a mantle be passed is a sense of direction, which can be achieved in a few ways. Batman Beyond, or Batman of the Future as was known in other parts of the world, manages to sidestep some of these issues right out of the gate by being born of an adaptive universe. So some of those expectations about going on forever are already mitigated. They're slightly detached from the experience where television shows begin and end, or are abruptly cancelled and mourned for all time. So already the mentality going into it is going to be different. Batman Beyond was a spin-off continuation series taking place in the DCAU, the DC animated universe, which had begun in Batman the Animated Series in 1992, which is still widely regarded as one of the best and certainly a definitive moment for Batman adaptations. The Batman Beyond series initially aired from 1999 to 2001 and lasted 52 episodes. Now, right out of the gate, this series gives itself an advantage. Batman Beyond is set in the future of Gotham City in what is now called Neo Gotham. And not just a little in the future, decades. This allows for several important things to happen. It provides a natural type of time skip wherein many details and changes can be both formulated and left to be explained later. It also allows the character of Bruce Wayne to age, which confronts the viewer with the reality that Bruce Wayne can't be Batman forever. It also allows for the landscape of Gotham to have been changed. Batman Beyond gives Neo Gotham a distinct yet still slightly familiar look to classic Gotham. It's highlighted in episodes such as Season 1's Shriek, when Bruce goes to visit Crime Alley, which is set to be built over and is already levels below where most of the action in the city takes place. It's a physical representation of how things have changed, while also placing Crime Alley and hence Batman as the foundation for Neo Gotham. Having so much time clearly elapsed places Batman Beyond in a different position than, say, an event like Future State, which was a comic event that ran at DC in 2021. This event claimed to be in the future, but in some instances was only 5 years forward, and all the original versions of characters were still around and capable of fulfilling their original roles, and in some cases still were, which then ends up adding the inevitable okay, then why replace them question. Or could add the feeling of dilution to the process. It didn't allow the breathing space that time can give, a grace period that allows events in time to have relevance, and it can also be a tactful way to remove the pre-legacy characters. Which brings us to the area where Batman Beyond truly excels. When introducing a new legacy character who is then going to replace their mentor figure, the question then becomes, but why? Why are they being replaced? Or if they're just flat out replacing them, then what happened to the original? Why are they not there? Why can't Bruce Wayne be Batman? All of these are natural questions. Bruce Wayne has been Batman since 1939. For all intents and purposes, he is the character. If one wants to turn the role of Batman into a mantle, one has to sell the idea somehow. Be that by playing with the concept of Batman as an urban legend or something else. Batman Beyond starts this process by introducing the concept of time and then moves forward. The first episode of Batman Beyond is entitled Rebirth, and rather than starting off with Terry, our future Batman, it starts off with Bruce and why he stopped being Batman. It starts us off less in the future than we will end up in 2019, but it's still more forward than we have been in Batman the Animated Series or the Superman Animated Series. We see that Bruce is still Batman, but that he has some health problems. He's had to rely on a more augmented bat suit, and in an attempt to pull off what should be an incredibly routine rescue, he starts to have severe health issues to the point of collapse. And what happens next is so devastating and so in keeping with everything we've learned about Batman in this universe and even outside of it that it's just painful. It creates a good foundational point for the viewer to understand why Bruce would stop being Batman. In desperation to stop the villains, he picks up one of the goons' fallen guns.
No! Don't!
You can see Bruce breaking twofold here. Not only because he picked up a gun and used it to intimidate, something which is antithetical to his worldview, but also because of how easily it works. All those nights, and all he has to do is hold up a gun. It's heartbreaking. When Bruce brings down the lights on the Batcave, you understand it. All the elements coming together. Time, aging, health, and disillusionment. Yeah, it's not the happiest beginning. Some don't love Batman Beyond because of the tone. It feels like a very sad outcome for Bruce. It doesn't really represent Batman's journey as a happy or successful one. But this series uses that as yet another aspect in the journey of bolstering Terry. And they succeed at a hurdle where many others stumble. When attempting to have a new character come on and replace another one, they have to be bringing something to the table. What is it that they can do that makes you interested in them? What do they have that's unique that makes them a worthy successor? Are they advancing the story? Are they presenting some kind of new angle to explore? Are they in some way better than the previous character? Or have certain attributes that can be viewed as advantages? These last two are hard ones. For one does want there to be at least some little elements of those ideas present, but pulling that off without insulting the prior character is key in getting audience acceptance. Even if one isn't the hugest fan of the already established character, chances are they've heard of them and are more familiar with them, and it is highly likely going into a series bearing that character's name that they are a fan in some capacity. So at base, you may be dealing with many people who are more loyal to the pre-existing character than your new creation. One of the quickest ways to give a new character a hill that is completely avoidable that they don't have to climb is to have them come out the gate swinging at their predecessor. Be that metaphorical, literally, or using the narration box. This also ends up doing a disservice to the new character themselves, as it focuses their growth on their predecessor and contextualizes them by that. So it places the viewer or reader in a position where they're judging them based on the previous iteration rather than looking at what's cool and good about them, which is already something the audience is primed for anyway when the focus should be on what's interesting about them as a character and what are they bringing to the table. The next Batman, or I Am Batman, suffers from this a lot. Most recent time of recording. Just let Jace be Jace, not Tim Fox. He's interesting, he has interesting things, let him be interesting. stop talking about Bruce. It's getting a bit better in that regard, but it did it so much at the start that some people may have left at that point. A different and more rewarding path to take is the one taken by Batman Beyond in letting the story itself do the talking. Let the story showcase the predecessor's flaws and failures without having to throw them in the audience's face or beat them over the head with it. The idea of Batman failing is a hard pill to swallow if you're a Batman fan. So Batman Beyond presents this through the world itself rather than, say, having Terry yell at Bruce that he's better than him. Their conflicts tend to be situational about how to handle a certain event or villain, which also works out better because it makes it more personal and easier to relate to. And then it can be related to the larger context as a whole. So what are the ways that it's showcased that Batman and Bruce haven't done the best job? Well, Gotham is still besieged by crime, and the legacy that the villains have left is far from positive. For example, there's Joker's gangs roaming around. Gangs of people calling themselves Jokers. Bruce has lost control of his company and now has a business partner who funds criminals. In fact, that is what leads to Terry's father being murdered when he learns of the development of a biological weapon which is being developed by Wayne Powers Tech, which also thematically continues the question as to Bruce's and Batman's importance to Gotham. What impact does Batman have on Gotham City, and is it positive or negative? Bruce is in a way indirectly responsible for Terry, and then the series would lean into that far too hard and get biological with it. But that doesn't happen to the end, and it's a Miles varies thing. Some really like that conclusion, but I digress. There are many ways Batman has failed the city, but because he has been presented sympathetically and you understand the reasons he stepped back, plus there's been so much time establishing it, it leaves Terry in the position of being able to form a new relationship between Batman and Neo Gotham, and potentially make things better because there are things that do need improving. So his story is different, but not too different. Terry and Bruce meet when Terry is being pursued by some Jokers, and to his surprise, an aged Bruce Wayne is able to take them out, but he then collapses, and Terry has to help him back into Wayne Manor. In the process, he discovers the Batcave and Wayne's secret. But so much time has passed, you can kind of sidestep the whole, oh, is he gonna tell people because people want to know plot, because, well, it doesn't really matter that much anymore. Plus, then Terry's dad is killed, and he has other things to think about, like stealing the Batsuit. So Terry starts off as Batman in that that's the mantle he at first, well, steals, and then Bruce allows him to take on and trains him in. In doing so, they actually recreate a very familiar dynamic, that of Batman and Robin. Terry is Batman, but he's also being trained by Bruce like a Robin. And that father figure dynamic, which is also part of the classic duo, is present. So while you're seeing Terry enter Neo Gotham as Batman, it's through the lens of a Batman and Robin story with which one is already familiar, which can make it much more palpable. By reintroducing this dynamic, this universe is, for the time being, able to avoid the dead mentor trope. Bruce gets to live for now and be a character, but he doesn't overwhelm or pull focus from Terry, which is accomplished largely by letting Terry have his own unique elements in the universe, one of them being a key component of Batman lore. Now this section will be a mileage may vary for some. Some feel that Terry has a very weak villain roster. However, I contend that is because it is being compared to Batman, Bruce Wayne Batman's villain roster, and he has one of the most iconic villain rosters across comics in general. The show actually showcases great restraint in not going to that well very often, which it could have. Instead, it utilizes such occurrences sparingly, at least in the animated verse before it transfers over to the comics. The fact that they're used so little also makes them feel more important, and they also largely pick villains who could still be around or showcase their ultimate fates in interesting ways. The season 1 episode The Winning Edge does this quite well through introducing performance-enhancing drug called Slappers, which upon examination appears to have the same base formula as Venom utilized by Bane. But when Terry goes to confront him, he's an old man, completely destroyed by the years of using Venom and now needing a steady supply just to stay alive. Rather than having Terry fight a somehow still threatening Bane for nostalgia, the story once again uses the time skip to showcase that things are truly different, which makes Terry's world feel like things are truly moving forward. And it does this by having a host of villains who are unique to Terry and come at him from different aspects of his life. Spellbinder is tied to Terry's high school experience and youth, accounts they're abusing his position and utilizing his spellbinding tech to cause hallucinations so he can rob the rich parents of students. Why? Because he's bored. He later comes back a few times. One of the highlights is a VR episode that has aged incredibly well, where he gets kids from unhappy homes addicted to a virtual reality where for the most part they just live out happy existences. Shriek is a villain who starts off trying to drive Bruce Wayne insane at the behest of his evil business partner Derek Powers. This ends up becoming an opportunity for Terry to develop his detective skills outside of help from Bruce, because Terry isn't as obsessive or innately capable of deducing things as Bruce is. He's different. This is something that he needs to learn. It's a skill that he builds up. Ink produces a superpowered threat for Terry to face. The updated Royal Flush Gang provides a love interest that steers clear of the Catwoman dynamic for Romeo and Juliet one. at the start. There's Terry's ex-friend from juvie who becomes a hulking monster after a chemical accident. Blight, the transformed Derek Powers himself, irradiated by the very nerve toxin that he killed Terry's father over. It's a good design. The glowing skull is a good design. Just look at Geiger, it comes back. People want this design. And that's just to name a few of the characters. So many are introduced to this universe to really help build it up and make it feel complete and give Terry some unique challenges. Of course, a handoff to a new character cannot succeed if you don't craft a likable character in the first place, and even if you do, it can still be a hard sell. Heck, some of the most likable characters have still failed, or the status quo been reverted eventually. Terry already has all the universe and story beats we mentioned going for him, so what else does he have in his corner? Well, he's different from Bruce in some key ways, and that impacts how he interacts with Gotham and with all the other characters. This ends up being essential, and it keeps him from being a rehash, so you don't have to see a new character doing the exact same things. And Terry came across as likable to many fans, although of course not everyone is gonna like every character. And Terry being a more well-rounded one, he also has flaws. He can be argumentative and a bit snippy, sometimes slow on the uptake. He's also presented as growing and wanting to learn. Terry is given a slightly Jason Todd-esque backstory in that he was a juvenile delinquent and that it's the death of his father and being Batman that has really made him turn his life around. It recontextualized how he saw the world, but he's still young and he still acts that way.
If you had any proof they were gonna try something tonight, it would be different. But I'm not gonna change my plans because of a hunch.
Batman would.
Hey, I put my life on the line all the time. One night's not gonna make any difference.
One night always makes the difference.
Terry has got to learn how to balance being Batman and just having responsibilities in general, which in general, again, tends to be a pretty popular trope. He also has to learn to be Batman. We see him training how to fight, but also he needs to learn to investigate, which is one of the areas Bruce has a hard time letting go. So he usually has to do this when Bruce is out of commission or away for some reason. It also gives some of his support something to do to help him, like Max. Missed opportunities with Max. But regardless, we grow with Terry. It doesn't end up feeling like Terry came out of nowhere, even though he kind of did. And it doesn't feel like he's stealing anything, even though that's literally how he got the batsuit. The reason? It feels like he's earning it. We're watching him do it. Another key factor is he likes Bruce, and Bruce likes him. You can accomplish a handoff without that, but it makes it so much easier when the characters like each other. You get to see this positive relationship, and he also softens Bruce up. Just as you get to see Terry coming to be Batman, we also get episodes where we get to see Bruce letting go of being Batman. A good example of this is the difference between Bruce in season 1, when during the Shriek episode he reveals he knew that he wasn't hearing voices because the voices called him Bruce, and that wasn't what he called himself.
What do you call yourself? Oh yeah, I suppose you would. But that's my name now. To the season 3 episode Out of the Past, where Terry takes Bruce to a musical about Batman, and it's very much treated as a farce and it hurts Bruce deeply. So when Talia seemingly shows up and offers him the chance to be young again via Lazarus Pit, he actually goes through with the session and is tempted. And then the episode goes insane. It's not Talia, it's Raish inside of Talia's body, and yes, he seduced him. He wants to take over Bruce's body so that he can show up in Gotham and pretend to be his own heir. That's quality content.
I should have known you'd cheat death again, Raish.
I don't cheat death, I master it.
What's interesting about this from a Terry perspective is that while from Bruce's side he comes to accept that he's not Batman, and even when given the choice to go back to it, sees that it's not as appealing as it once was for him. But for Terry's part, while he would have been sad, it's something that he would have allowed to happen, which leads to the core of what makes this passing of the torch so successful. It takes time. Terry may be in the Batman costume, but he doesn't just throw Bruce and his advice to the side. On the contrary, he needs those things. And he also doesn't feel fully confident at the start. Yes, he has his cocky moments, but you also see him make mistakes and grow. And you also start to see the moments where his knowledge and his relationship with the new city and the tech come to become advantages. All of that, coupled with seeing the impact Batman's absence had on Gotham, leads the viewer to feel that both Bruce and Terry matter as Batman. Bruce's Batman mattered and was important, and that's respected, and it all culminates in the swan song that is Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker. This is the animated film which sees Terry take on the Joker. It's at the end of this where you truly feel firmly, okay, Terry is Batman. Full stop. This is accomplished by seeing Terry take on Bruce's ultimate foe in a unique way. The Joker is treated as quite the serious threat, which he should be. This is both by the people there and by how long it took the series to get to him. He's also presented as 10 times more dangerous than the derivative Joker's gang. Just look at how Bruce reacts to him. Now in Terry's battle with the Joker, Terry is forced to confront the ultimate rallying cry that plagues any Mantle pass.
You're not Batman!
And it's in this moment where he recognizes, accepts that, and makes it an advantage. In doing so, he fully becomes his own Batman, defeating the Joker by doing something Bruce could never do, not taking him so seriously.
I can't hear you. Ha ha.
Even if one already considered Terry to be Batman, this really places him as Batman in this universe, presenting the concept of being the Batman this Gotham needs without coming out directly and saying it, and without throwing Bruce under the bus to do so, though some may feel that Bruce failing is already him under the bus. All of these things end up combining to create a very satisfying passing of the torch. Time, establishing the fall of the original Batman, creating a unique yet still familiar legacy character and dynamic, building upon the old universe to create new obstacles for him, and presenting him as eager to learn, but also as his own person. All of this can come together to create a legacy character people can accept. Not everyone, but you're never gonna get absolutely everyone. And of course, it is not a perfect series. It has some difficulties fitting into its own universe, the DCAU overall. And you are left at periods wondering, okay, well, where are these characters? Particularly Nightwing. And it is a way of presenting a very sad trajectory for Bruce Wayne's life, which is why, again, some reject the series based on premise outright. No, Batman deserves happiness. However, regardless of whether one enjoys the show or not, the factors that led to a solid Mantle pass remain. Now let's take a look at how it's bled back into comics, which varies. The world of Batman Beyond in comics has been interesting, and it's been quite the journey that has changed a lot as the comics themselves have changed. We'll do a brief overview of the various entries and series to this point, time of recording. If you want to hear about any more in depth, let me know. The series first entered the realm of comics as an adaptation / continuation of the DCAU series from 1999 to 2001, first with a mini-series and then with a series that ran for 24 issues. Both of these series were written by Hilary J. Bader, who had written extensively for the DCAU, including some Batman Beyond episodes. The pencils in the first 6-issue mini were by Rick Burchett, and Craig Russo handled the 24-issue run. These suffered from the usual fate that tie-ins tend to, and that is that not everybody comes over from the one medium to the next. The tone does change ever so slightly because of the change in medium. Still, this first run maintains the spirit, tone, and themes from the show, and if one liked the show, it's a fun addition to it, and you get some cool adventures and to see some of the characters and villains again, in the context of that universe. But Batman Beyond was destined for the ultimate goal of bleed back, and that is dissemination or assimilation into the main verse. This is a difficult feat for a character like Terry Mcginnis, especially when one considers the canon in place for comic book Batman, an already established lore decades long, even with reboots, and this contained Robins and even some brief Mantle passings and pre-made assumptions as to if there were to be a future Batman, who it would be. Still, it would be years before this would be attempted. While the tie-in series ended in 2001, you wouldn't see a Batman Beyond sighting in the main verse comics until 2005. He also briefly appeared in Countdown to Final Crisis, and a proper attempt to integrate the universes wouldn't be made until 2010, with an attempt that would first see them trying to reconcile both Terry and Damian's existence, as a popular headcanon at the time was that Damian should be Batman Beyond, which did not go over well with ardent Terry fans. Just Damian always usurping a mantle in some fans' minds. Some fans found a way to make it work, and there was a period where in fandom you would see Terry in a lot of fanfiction stories. It was a good time. That aforementioned issue of trying to deal with Terry and Damian was Batman 700, and it was very short as part of a there will always be a Batman in Gotham type deal. This would later be followed by a 6-issue miniseries by Adam Beechin, with art by Ryan Benjamin, which was summarized as the dark future of the legendary animated series comes to the DCU in a 6-issue miniseries as Terry Mcginnis, Bruce Wayne's young successor, as Batman faces his deadliest foe yet, a mystery murderer from the Dark Knight's past. Old faces return, new allies and enemies step into the light, and the partnership between Terry and Bruce, not to mention Terry and Bruce themselves, might not survive. This was meant to be the start of an ongoing, which it kinda was, but some may have noted the date, 2010. In 2011, the entire DC universe would be rebooted with the New 52. This wouldn't be too big a deal for Batman Beyond since he kind of existed outside of the main timeline anyway, so his series would just restart at number 1 again under Adam Beechin. This one would last for 8 issues, but it was already indicative that there was a bit of a problem for comic book Terry. He was becoming a bit hard to follow, unless you were already an ardent fan and keeping up with the runs. And that did not stop. 2012 saw the introduction of a digital initiative when DC was doing a very very strong digital comics is the future push. These were designed to be read online, but it was pre when the concept was optimizing for your phones, and instead they're more laid out for comiXology paneling, which makes them horizontally long, versus now when they're optimized for digital reading, they're vertical like that for your phone, so you can scroll. These series, from the 6-issue mini to this point, all had the same writer, so they at least maintained tone. The writer changes for the last arc of this, the final 4 issues. The digital editions were incredibly short, however, and the art in them appears much looser and more rushed. These series were all okay. They have some solid issues and some not so solid ones, but they don't fully recapture the magic, as it were, of the show. Enter 2013 and the reboot of the Batman Beyond universe, sort of. Not really, more it's just another relaunch, this time with a new creator, Kyle Higgins. You already do have to know some things because there's actually a little editor's note as to what you should have read before going into it. This is Batman Beyond 2.0, and these also have that digital optimization, but it can be easily altered for the trade, which it is. Also, Dick looks like Nick Fury for some reason. This series is not kind to Bruce Wayne at all, or really the DCAU history, and it presents a very awkward fusion at places. This series has a rather infamous plotline that you may have heard of. It's the Bruce gets Barbara pregnant and she miscarries while out fighting crime arc, and this is the cause of the rift between Bruce and Nightwing. And aside from those who read the series, that tends to be what gets remembered the most from this run. Make of that what you will. Dick and Babs feature much more heavily in this run, and Dick takes over the role of mentor for Terry, but the dynamic is quite different, and some of the characterizations of his supports are also drastically altered, particularly Melanie, aka 10. They take her into a Catwoman direction here, which sadly takes away the more separate rapport Terry and her had. This one ran for 40 issues until 2015. You do get to see Dick and Bruce reconcile by the conclusion, so that's nice. The story ends with a "the end" for now. But the next Batman Beyond comic to come out wouldn't feature Terry in the role, but instead Tim Drake. Up until this point, the DCAU had been the canon more lent into, with the DCU as the sprinkling. That was about to change. The next Batman comic is from 2015, this one by Dan Jurgens. This one played off the events that were happening in the DCU as a whole and was meant to play directly into the future that was supposed to be for that universe. So the New 52's future, that's where it was supposed to be taking place. This after Future's End, which saw Terry die. Tim Drake had been displaced in time and was now in Neo Gotham, where he took on the mantle of Batman Beyond. And if you didn't want Tim to be in Terry's role, this was not the series for you. At the start of it, they draw Tim looking so much like Terry that they're almost identical, to the point where if you just glanced at it, you might assume it was Terry. But he's not. This is how Terry looks in this series. Yeah, he gets better. You know, death. Just walk it off. Now, this series is done with the purely digital formatting, so it's back to your traditional comic book formatting, and it lasted for 16 issues. This is actually the series that reaffirms Tim's desire to not be Batman, so it's interesting to see that in 2021 it went back to him wanting the mantle. This short series now reads as a self-contained adventure, and it leads into a new Batman Beyond ongoing series beginning in 2016. This series was helmed for the most part by the same creative team as the prior series of Dan Jurgens and Bernard Chang. It ran for 50 issues until 2020. This series varied and was still operating under a fusion of the two canons, the DCU and the DCAU. It sometimes landed and other times didn't. I'll die on that hill as well as all the other hills that I'm all ashes are gonna be spread pretty thin. Damian has a bat dragon in this series. The other characters, Dick, Bruce, Barbara, and more, take up a decent amount of space in this series, so at times it doesn't feel like Terry's book at all. It's an interesting run, particularly if you want to take a look at how certain things are handled, like the Joker. Also, Booster Gold shows up. Huzzah! The series ends on the promise that will spin off into Justice League Beyond, which it does not. That was a filthy lie. This brings us to 2021 and Batman Urban Legends #7. This story is by Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly, art by Max Dunbar, colors by Sebastian Cheng, who are all set to do the miniseries spinning off of this Batman Beyond Neo Year. A story in this Batman anthology, which is setting up certain things in Batman lore, reintroduces Terry, this time through the lens of trying to hunt down Bruce Wayne's killer. Bruce is dying through most of this, mileage will vary. For some it feels inevitable, as Bruce was already so old even when the first series was airing. But for some, it's the way it's happening as a catalyst for Terry, when Terry never needed Bruce to be that kind of motivation for him. Others feel it's just getting him out of the way, and setting up something different, because for Terry, Bruce being alive is actually the common dynamic. Now this story does have some very strong callbacks to the series' first episode, Rebirth. Unfortunately, given the expository format, it tells you more than it shows you how you should feel about it. Some of it does really land, and you feel those feelings again of him having to pick up that gun. Other things, however, are a bit more murky and may not resonate quite as well. Such as this segment about how his father was afraid of him as he was falling to the ground because somehow he knew that he would become Batman. before he died? That aside, the story is a very solid little mystery that utilizes the benefits of some of the Omniverse to reset to a looser Batman Beyond canon seemingly closer to the DCAU's, where it will be able to ignore or take what it wants to from what has happened. As mentioned at the start of this could have been one of the Omniverse's strengths, playing in this Elseworlds type of space with pre-established universes. It could result in a series that is not as cluttered with the interconnections to the main verse as the comic series became. The death of Bruce Wayne, as well as the destruction of Wayne Manor, just blow it all up, sets up a new chapter for Terry, and one that has yet to be explored. And also the impact that Bruce's death would have on Gotham City, because he had become more active once more prior to this. You know, not letting his company be a bastion of evil and all that. There are a lot of intriguing stories one can tell with Terry that diverge from Bruce's lore. It's been shown that it can be done successfully, and perhaps it can be done again. Neo Gotham has potential, time of recording, and it will be interesting to see how the legacy of Terry continues on in comics. Again, perhaps he has a shot at one of those runs that stands the test of time against everything. One of those cool Elseworldy things, she says, hopefully. Regardless of whether he lands there or not, Terry stands out as an example of how Mantle can be passed on in a way that can appeal to old and new fans alike, but also serves as an example of how difficult that can be to translate into a format where stories go on forever, and time doesn't move on in the same way. Perhaps a story set in another universe is the answer for Terry, or perhaps no answer is required at all. Only time will tell. What do you think of Terry Mcginnis and Batman Beyond? Masterful Mantle pass, or what am I talking about? Who's your favorite Mantle pass or legacy character? Tell me things down below, and while you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking this time today spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.